Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling garden design.
Absolutely.
We'll be looking at the core principles, from planning for space and sunlight, to using color and texture and form to really bring your garden to life. We'll be drawing inspiration and practical advice from the Natural Gardener's Companion for this deep dive. I think you're going to find some real gems in there.
Absolutely. And it all starts with understanding your space and the sunlight it receives. It's like laying the foundation for a house. You can't build something beautiful and lasting without a solid base.
That's a great analogy. So first things first, we need to assess our space and see how much sunlight we're working with. Now, what's interesting is that the Natural Gardener's Companion talks about different types of garden spaces and the unique challenges they present, for example. If you're working with an urban balcony or terrace, you're probably dealing with limited space.
Exactly, but limited space doesn't mean limited possibilities. The book highlights vertical gardening and container gardening as clever solutions for those situations. Imagine a wall bursting with colorful flowers, or a cascade of herbs spilling from a hanging basket.
I love those ideas, and it makes me think, what about those of us with more traditional suburban backyards? What are some of the key considerations there?
Well, for backyards, the book emphasizes understanding your soil quality. You want to know what you're working with. Before you start planting, it also talks about mapping out where the sun hits different parts of your yard throughout the day. Some plants love basking in full sun, while others prefer a bit of shade.
That's so important. I've definitely made the mistake of planting sun-loving flowers in a shady spot before, and let's just say they weren't too happy about it. But there's something I found really cool in the book. It encourages incorporating existing trees and shrubs into your design rather than ripping them out.
It's all about working with nature, not against it. Those trees and shrubs can provide shade structure and even habitats for wildlife. It's like adding instant character to your garden.
I'm all about that. Now, what about those lucky folks with rural plots? They have so much space to work with, but I imagine there are different challenges too.
Of course, with larger plots, the book highlights the importance of water access. You'll need to figure out how you're going to keep all those plants hydrated. And it also emphasizes the importance of considering the impact on local wildlife. You want to create a garden that's not only beautiful, but also beneficial to the surrounding ecosystem.
That makes sense. It's a reminder that even with a lot of space, we're still part of a larger natural system. So we've talked about different types of garden spaces, but there's one concept in the book that I found particularly fascinating: microclimates.
Microclimates, they're fascinating, aren't they? The book describes it as thinking of your garden as having different neighborhoods, each with its own unique personality and needs. You might have a sunny spot that's perfect for tomatoes, a shady corner that's ideal for ferns, or a low-lying area that stays moist longer, making it a haven for moisture-loving plants.
It's amazing how even a small garden can have these microclimates. And it makes you realize how much thought and observation goes into truly understanding your space. I bet you've encountered some interesting microclimates in your own gardening experiences.
Oh, absolutely. I remember one garden where a south-facing brick wall created this incredibly warm and sheltered microclimate. It was like a little sun trap, perfect for growing heat-loving herbs and peppers.
That's so cool. It really highlights the importance of paying attention to the nuances of your space. The Natural Gardener's Companion puts it perfectly. Assessing your space thoroughly is the foundation upon which a successful garden is built.
Couldn't agree more. Once you have a good understanding of your space and its unique characteristics, you can start thinking about the fun part, bringing in those elements of design.
Okay, let's talk design. We've got the foundation sorted. Now, how do we make it beautiful?
Well, just like with interior design, there are some principles we can follow to make sure our garden doesn't clash. It's all about using color, texture, and form to create a harmonious and visually appealing space.
I love that comparison to interior design. So let's break down each element, starting with color. The Natural Gardener's Companion talks about using warm colors, reds, oranges, yellows, to create a sense of energy and excitement.
Exactly. Warm colors tend to draw the eye and create a focal point. Imagine a cluster of vibrant red poppies or a swath of golden sunflowers. They'll really make your garden pop.
And what about cool colors?
Cool colors like blues, greens, and purples have a more calming and soothing effect. They can create a sense of depth and serenity in your garden. Imagine a path lined with lavender or a shady corner filled with ferns and hostas. It's like creating a little oasis of peace.
Okay, I'm feeling calmer already. And the book mentions a really interesting technique for using color, creating a gradient effect.
Ah, yes. The book gives the example of creating a flower bed with yellows transitioning to oranges and then deep reds. It's like a sunset right in your garden. Absolutely stunning.
That sounds so beautiful.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to texture. What are some of the key things to keep in mind when working with texture in the garden?
Texture is all about the surface quality of plants, how they feel to the touch. You have fine and delicate textures like ferns and grasses, and then you have bold and coarse textures like hostas and succulents. The book encourages us to create visual interest by juxtaposing these different textures.
So it's about creating contrast and visual interest, just like with color. What's a specific example from the book that really stands out to you?
One example that comes to mind is pairing a large-leafed hosta with its bold texture alongside the delicate fronds of a fern. The visual contrast is just stunning. It's like a study in opposites, but they complement each other beautifully.
I can totally picture that. And it makes me think about how texture isn't just about the visual impact. It's also about the tactile experience of the garden. Imagine brushing your hand against a soft, feathery grass, or running your fingers over the rough bark of a tree. It adds another dimension to the sensory experience of the garden.
Absolutely. It's about engaging all of our senses, not just our sight. Now, the last element of design we need to talk about is form.
Okay, what is form and why is it important?
Form refers to the shape and structure of plants, whether they're upright, spreading, rounded, or weeping. Understanding form is crucial for creating balance and visual flow in your garden.
So it's like thinking about the architecture of the plants and how they interact with each other.
Exactly. And the book provides some great examples of using form strategically, for instance. It talks about using a pair of symmetrical evergreen trees to frame a garden path entrance. It creates a sense of formality and invitation, like an open door welcoming you into the garden.
I love that imagery. It makes me think about how even the smallest details, like the shape of a plant, can contribute to the overall mood and feel of a garden.
It's all about the details, and one technique that can really enhance the sense of depth and dimension in your garden is layering, just like nature does in a forest.
Layering, tell me more about that.
Imagine a woodland scene. You have tall trees creating the canopy, then a layer of shrubs underneath. Followed by lower-growing perennials and ground covers, this layering creates a sense of depth and visual interest. You can achieve a similar effect in your garden by planting taller plants at the back, gradually decreasing in height as you move towards the front.
It's like creating a living tapestry with different heights and textures. I'm starting to see how all these elements, color, texture, and form, work together to create a cohesive and beautiful garden design.
And just like any art form, there are endless possibilities for creativity and personal expression. What kind of mood or style are you hoping to achieve in your own garden?
That's a great question. It makes me realize that garden design is about so much more than just choosing pretty plants. It's about expressing your personality and creating a space that reflects your unique style.
Exactly. Are you drawn to bold colors and dramatic shapes? Or do you prefer a more serene and understated look? Do you envision a formal garden with symmetrical lines and carefully pruned hedges? Or are you dreaming of a more whimsical and naturalistic space?
I think for me, I'm leaning towards a more relaxed and naturalistic style. Something that feels wild and free, but still has a sense of harmony and balance. I love the idea of incorporating lots of different textures and colors, and maybe even a few whimsical elements like a bird bath or a wind chime.
That sounds lovely. And it reminds me of something that the Natural Gardener's Companion emphasizes. There's no right or wrong way to design a garden. The most important thing is to create a space that brings you joy and reflects your personal connection to the natural world.
That's a beautiful sentiment. It's about creating a garden that feels like an extension of yourself, a place where you can relax, recharge, and connect with nature.
Exactly, and that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive. We'll delve deeper into some of the practical aspects of creating your dream garden, from choosing the right plants to prepping the soil and even incorporating some fun DIY projects.
I can't wait. I'm already feeling inspired to get out there and start digging.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground in planning our garden, from assessing our space to thinking about color, texture, and form. But let's get practical for a moment.
I was just thinking about that. We've got all these grand ideas swirling around, but how do we actually bring them to life? The Natural Gardener's Companion does mention some DIY projects, right?
It does, and I think you'll find some really fun and useful ideas. Let's talk about one of the most popular projects, building raised garden beds. They're a great way to add structure and beauty to your garden. Plus, they offer some practical advantages, especially for those of us dealing with poor soil or limited space.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are the steps involved?
Well, first things first, you need to choose your materials. The book suggests untreated lumber like cedar or redwood for durability, or you could use bricks or concrete blocks for a more rustic look. It's all about personal preference and the overall aesthetic you're going for.
So many choices. And what about the size? How big should these raised beds be?
The book recommends keeping it manageable. A common size is 4 feet by 8 feet and about 6 to 12 inches deep. That way you can easily reach the center from all sides without having to step into the bed, which helps prevent soil compaction. Happy soil equals happy plants, after all.
Ah, makes sense. I'm already picturing a beautiful raised bed filled with herbs and flowers. What happens after we build the frame?
Once the frame is built, you want to prep the site, lay down landscape fabric to prevent those pesky weeds from popping up. The book even suggests adding a layer of cardboard underneath the fabric for extra protection in areas with particularly stubborn weeds.
That's a great tip. I've
Yeah.
definitely battled my fair share of weeds. So we've got our frame, our fabric. Now it's time for the good stuff, right? Filling it up.
Exactly. The book recommends a mix of topsoil and compost, ideally in a 3.1 ratio. Remember those compost piles we talked about earlier? This is where they really shine. It's like giving your plants a gourmet meal packed with all the nutrients they need to thrive.
I love this. So we've got raised beds covered. What other DIY projects does the book offer?
Well, let's move on to something perfect for those of us with limited space or a love for climbing plants trellises. They add vertical dimension to your garden, plus they provide support for those beautiful vines like beans, peas, and even tomatoes.
Trellises, yes. I've always loved the look of a lush, vine-covered trellis. How do we go about building one?
It's actually pretty straightforward. First, you'll need some sturdy stakes or poles secured in the ground. Then you'll attach your chosen material for the trellis itself, wire mesh netting, or even just some strong string. It depends on the look you want and the type of plants you'll be growing.
So many options. And what about the plants themselves? Are there certain types of climbers that do better on trellises than others?
That's a great question. The book actually mentions this if you're growing heavier climbers like cucumbers or those juicy heirloom tomatoes. You'll want a sturdier structure like an A-frame or a tower. Those plants can get pretty hefty.
Good point. I've definitely had tomato plants that needed a little extra support. So we've talked about building structures. Now let's talk about the stars of the show, the plants themselves. I'm curious, what does the Natural Gardener's Companion say about choosing the right plants for our gardens?
It all starts with understanding your plant hardiness zone. This tells you the average minimum winter temperature for your region, which helps determine which plants can survive those chilly months. You wouldn't want to plant a delicate tropical flower in an area that gets below freezing. It's all about choosing plants that are well suited to your specific environment.
So check those labels, folks. Make sure the plants you're buying are compatible with your climate. But there's another important factor to consider: right microclimates.
Yes, those microclimates can make a big difference. You might have a south-facing wall that absorbs heat and creates a warm, sheltered spot, perfect for sun-loving herbs. Or maybe you have a low-lying area that stays moist, which could be ideal for a rain garden or moisture-loving ferns.
It's amazing how even a small garden can have such diverse microclimates. Now, one thing I really appreciate about the Natural Gardener's Companion is its emphasis on choosing native plants. What's the reasoning behind that?
Native plants are amazing. They've evolved to thrive in your specific region's climate and soil conditions, which means they're naturally more resistant to pests and diseases. Plus, they require less water and fertilizer. Talk about low maintenance.
And they're so important for supporting local wildlife, too. They provide food and shelter for pollinators like bees and butterflies, as well as birds and other beneficial creatures.
Exactly. It's all about creating that beautiful balance, that interconnectedness within the ecosystem. Now, while we're on the topic of the right plants, the Natural Gardener's Companion also encourages us to think about companion planting.
Companion planting, that sounds intriguing. What is that exactly?
It's the idea of planting certain species together to benefit each other. Some plants deter pests, others attract beneficial insects, and some even improve the growth and flavor of their neighbors. For example, planting marigolds near tomatoes can help repel those pesky tomato hornworms.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's like creating little plant partnerships.
Exactly, and it's a great example of how we can work with nature to create a healthier and more vibrant garden.
I'm already starting to see my garden as this intricate web of connections with plants supporting each other. And all these little ecosystems thriving within it. It's pretty amazing.
It is. And speaking of interconnectedness, that brings us to one of the most important aspects of natural gardening, organic pest, and disease management.
Ah, yes. Even the most well-designed gardens can face challenges from unwanted visitors.
It's inevitable, but the good news is there are plenty of organic solutions that are effective and environmentally friendly, and the Natural Gardener's Companion is a treasure trove of tips and tricks.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the book's top recommendations for keeping those pests and diseases at bay?
Well, first and foremost, the book stresses the importance of early detection, regularly inspecting your plants for any signs of trouble. Unusual spots, holes, wilting can make all the difference. It's much easier to manage a problem when it's small.
Right, like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But what happens if we do spot a problem? What are our options?
The book recommends starting with the least invasive methods first. Often, simple cultural practices can be incredibly effective.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Think about good garden hygiene, removing any diseased plant material, avoiding overhead watering to keep the foliage dry, and practicing crop rotation to prevent the buildup of soil-borne diseases. These simple steps can go a long way.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about those times when you need a little extra help? Are there any organic treatments we can use?
Absolutely. There's a whole arsenal of organic treatments that are safe for the environment and effective against specific problems. Neem oil, insecticidal soaps. And even some copper-based fungicides can be used to target those pesky pests and diseases. But the key is to always follow the label instructions carefully to avoid harming those beneficial insects we've worked so hard to attract.
Right, it's all about finding that balance, protecting the good guys while keeping the bad guys in check.
Exactly. And sometimes a little bit of pest activity is actually a good thing. It provides a food source for those beneficial insects and birds, helping to maintain that natural balance in your garden ecosystem.
That's a good point. It's all about creating a healthy and resilient garden that can handle a little bit of stress. I'm feeling pretty empowered to tackle whatever challenges come my way.
That's the spirit, and that's what the Natural Gardener's Companion is all about, empowering gardeners to create spaces that are not only beautiful, but also healthy and sustainable.
I couldn't agree more, but you know me, I always want more. What other gems does the Natural Gardener's Companion have in store for us?
Well, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some more advanced gardening techniques like permaculture and biodynamic gardening. These approaches take those ecological principles we've been discussing to a whole new level.
Ooh, permaculture and biodynamic gardening. I've read those terms before, but I'm not entirely sure what they mean. I'm so curious to learn more.
They're fascinating concepts, for sure. Get ready to expand your gardening horizons as we delve into the world of self-sustaining ecosystems, cosmic connections, and the magic of working in harmony with nature's rhythms.
This sounds incredible. I can't wait. We've talked about planting our gardens, building structures, choosing the right plants, even dealing with pests. Now, as promised, we're diving into some advanced concepts from the Natural Gardener's Companion, permaculture, and biodynamic gardening. These always seemed a bit mystical to me, but I'm ready to be enlightened.
They are fascinating approaches that take ecological gardening to the next level. Both emphasize working in harmony with nature's patterns and cycles, but in unique ways.
Let's start with permaculture. The book describes it as designing sustainable and self-sufficient ecosystems. But what does that actually look like in a garden?
Imagine a garden where every element has a purpose interconnected, like a beautiful puzzle. You might use rainwater harvesting for irrigation, then swales or berms to direct that water precisely where needed. Nitrogen-fixing legumes near fruit trees provide natural fertilizer, while those trees offer shade to herbs that prefer cooler conditions. It's a closed loop, minimizing waste and maximizing efficiency.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like a self-sustaining mini ecosystem. And the book mentions that permaculture isn't just about gardening. It's a whole philosophy of living in harmony with nature.
Exactly. It's about creating systems that are not only sustainable, but regenerative. They actually enhance the health and productivity of the surrounding environment. It's a way of thinking that can apply to so much more than just our gardens.
Okay, my mind is blown. Now on to biodynamic gardening. The book describes it as a holistic approach, viewing the garden as a living organism connected to the cosmos. That sounds pretty out there, even for me.
I know it can seem mystical at first, but there are practical elements too. Biodynamic gardeners use special preparations made from herbs, minerals, and even cow manure applied to the soil and plants to enhance their vitality.
Cow manure. Okay, you've got to elaborate on that one.
One well-known preparation is horn manure, or preparation 500. Cow manure is stuffed into a cow horn, buried for months, then dug up and used as a potent soil amendment. The idea is that the horn buried in the earth absorbs cosmic energies which are transferred to the manure, creating a life force for the soil.
So it's like supercharged fertilizer, infused with cosmic energy.
That's one way to think about it. Biodynamic gardeners believe it stimulates microbial activity, improves soil structure, and boosts plant health.
Interesting. The book also mentions using a lunar calendar for planting and harvesting. Is that part of the cosmic connection?
Exactly. The idea is that the moon's phases and position in relation to the constellations influence sap flow in plants affecting their growth. They might plant leafy crops during a waxing moon when sap flow is thought to be stronger in the upper parts, and root crops during a waning moon when energy is focused below ground.
Wow, it's like gardening by the stars. So we have permaculture with its focus on interconnected systems, and biodynamic gardening with its unique preparations and lunar influences. What stands out to you most from these approaches?
For me, it's the deep respect for nature that underlies both. It's about observing, listening, and working in partnership with the natural world rather than trying to control it.
That's what I love about gardening in general. It's a constant reminder that we're part of something bigger connected to the earth and its rhythms.
Yeah.
Whether we embrace permaculture, biodynamic gardening, or just incorporate some of their principles, it's about creating a garden that brings joy and contributes to the beauty and health of our planet.
Beautifully said. The Natural Gardener's Companion reminds us that gardening is a journey of discovery and learning. Experiment, get your hands dirty, and find what works best for you and your own little slice of paradise.
So true. We've covered so much in this deep dive into garden design. I hope you're feeling as inspired as I am to get out there and create your dream garden. Remember, no matter the size of your space, approach your garden with curiosity, creativity, and a deep love for the natural world. Happy gardening.